Hi, this is Mashnu, and here is a short video about the second round of the Chess Olympiad in Istanbul. The second round was played yesterday, and one of the games that lasted really long was the game of Nakamura. 107 moves, and Nakamura showed how patiently he can play, trying to find a way to win, and he won the game. It was a very interesting Queen's Endgame, but I'm not going to show you that game because it's simply too long to cover in a video. So I've chosen for another game that is quite exciting. It's a very sharp game with attacks and counterattacks. I'm sure you are going to like it. It was played on board 3 of the match between Indonesia and Chile. Sorry, and well, Chile is the country where I was born, so I really like very much to see this Chilean grandmasters play. And on board 3 was playing with black pieces the Chilean grandmaster Mauricio Flores Rios against the Indonesian player, also a grandmaster, Taufik Halai, playing white. So, well, let's have a look at the game. d4 played by the Indonesian grandmaster, and Flores Rios answers knight to f6, and after c4 and g6, knight to c3, we have a position when black has to make a decision here to play d5, the Grunfeld, or bishop to g7, go to the into this King's Indian, and that's what happened in this game. Bishop to g7, so after e4, d6, and there we have this well-known position where white has to make a choice now which variation to enter. The Semish variation with f3, or the main line with the knight f3, bishop e2, but this time white chose to go for a system that I also like very much to play with white, and that's the 4 pawns attack, 4 pawns variation with f4. Characteristic for this variation is that white tries to find a way to play e5 or f5 later in the game. This massive pawn row in the center, controlling the complete 5th square, looks very dangerous, but black of course has also ways to counter, and that's what we are going to see a few moves later. After cancelling kingside, knight to f3, now c5 immediately, attacking this white pawn center. White chose here to close the center immediately with d5, and black plays e6. Now after bishop e2 and this trade on d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, we see a pawn structure that is known from the modern Benoni. And in this modern Benoni we see that white wants to play e5, try to find a way when he can play e5, and black often tries to attack on the queen side. The next moves are also interesting to see. Bishop to g4, cancelling kingside, and now bishop takes f3. Now this may look a bit strange for some of you, and you may ask, why is black giving up his bishop's pair without any urgency here? Well, the reason is that in this type of setups, like this modern Benoni setup for black has less space, especially in the center. There is less space because of this advanced pawn on d5 of white, and that makes it quite difficult for black to maneuver with these pieces. For example, if black would play the knight to d7, that is the most natural way to develop that knight, then already this bishop wouldn't have any possible retreat if it is attacked. So with black here, what we want to do is to trade one of the light pieces so we can have more space to maneuver. So that's the reason why black plays here bishop takes f3. Bishop takes f3. Another reason, by the way, is that the knight on f3 was looking at these 2 center squares, and these dark squares in the center are also the range for this bishop, this fianchettoed bishop. So black gains a bit more influence into this central squares. Now bishop b to d7 is played, bishop to e3, and now knight to e8, a move that we see in several variations of the King's Indian. Often in the King's Indian, so let's say in other variations, when black has a pawn on e5 instead of c5, so the c pawn is still on c7 and e5 is played, we see this knight e8 idea with the idea of playing f5 and attack on the king side. Now in this case, knight to e5 is not mainly meant to play f5, but more to go with the knight to c7 to support a queenside attack. Another idea to achieve this is often that this knight that went to d7 now goes to a6 and then to c7 to support b5. Well, let's continue. Queen to d2, a6, preparing b5, and now white decides not to prevent b5 by playing the move a4. Now white moves immediately actively with the rook to e1. So black plays e5, and as we have learned from Aaron Nimzowitsch in the book My System, when someone attacks on a wing, you have to try to counter in the center, and that's what white does here. He plays e5 now. This is a very compromising move always in this type of positions, because once you play e5, the center can be opened, and it's a decision that must be made very consciously and calculating the different possibilities. Now in this case, black took on e5 and white now played d6. That's the idea of trading this d6 pawn for the e5 pawn, is that by inviting black to do this, white can advance the pawn to d6, and an important square is being available here for the white knight from c3, and of course also the bishop is attacking a8 at the moment. But this is a very important plan with possibilities to go to other important squares. Well, here black played rook to b8, and now f takes e5, bishop takes e5. So this pawn on d6 is being attacked by black, and white tries to find initiative by activating his pieces a bit more. Bishop to g5 is played now, attacking the black queen, and black replies with f6. Now f6 has of course two sides. On one hand, you defend with black with f6, attacking the bishop on g5, but on the other hand, there is here a diagonal being opened towards the black king, so it has also his counter side. Now this bishop from g5 goes to h6, attacking the rook on f8, and black places the knight in between, knight e8 to g7. Now a check follows, bishop to d5. Another move that was possible was knight to d5, and then if bishop takes d6, the knight can go to f4, with the idea of there is a threat, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, then knight to e6 check, winning the queen. It was also possible, but the Indonesian grandmaster chose to give a check with the bishop on d5 and go for a different type of attack. King to h8, and now rook to f3. Now what's the plan of white? Attacking the black king, preparing the rook to go to h3, preparing to capture on g7, so if black retakes, then queen goes to h6 check, and then giving checkmate on h7. So white has a very attacking position here. What to do with black? Well, this Chilean grandmaster chose to give a check first on d4, and after king to h1 centralizes pieces by playing knight to e5, attacks the rook on f3, and this rook goes to h3 as planned. Now the other knight goes from g7 to f5. So black is bringing all his pieces now towards the center. There is a beautiful square here on e3 that could be interesting for this knight. That's why black is now sacrificing the exchange. White didn't accept this sacrifice, and it's understandable, because it's interesting. If white would take here on f8, then there is queen takes f8, and this e3 square is already becoming interesting for black. Not to play it right now, because then after rook takes e3, then white wins 2 light pieces for a rook. But this of course can be prepared, perhaps taking on d6 first, then knight to g4 and knight to e3, things like that. But well, white didn't want to go into this. He preferred to bring the other rook to f1, so put more pressure on this half open f-file and allow black to take on h6. And that's what black did. Knight takes h6, and now queen takes h6 with a little threat on h7 that must be stopped. So black plays queen to d7 to defend h7. Now white moves knight to e4. Now just take a second to have a look at this position and look at the center. Both players centralizing their pieces. This is such a beautiful example of the power of centralization. When light pieces are standing in the center of the board, they are very powerful, because they can go to all different places, and they are very active. So knight to e4, and now black replied knight to g4. Of course, after I'll go back one move, the direct threat of knight to e4 is to take on f6. So with knight to g4, black defends f6 and attacks the queen on h6. The queen goes to h4 now, again attacking the f6 point, and now the knight from g4 goes to e3, this ideal square for the black knight. At this moment, white had to make an important decision, because this knight is attacking not only the rook on f1, it's also attacking this bishop on d5. So it looks as if the only possible reply is to take the knight with the rook, but there was another option. White took, by the way, in the game, rook takes e3 was played, but let me show you one other possibility. That was bishop to e6. The bishop can go to e6, attacking the queen. The queen may not take on e6, because then queen takes h7 is checkmate. So this queen would have to go to, for example, g7 to keep defending h7, and then white has time to save his rook from f1 by placing it on f3. Now here the position is, well, let's say unclear. Black has a nice position. These two pieces, the bishop on d4 and the knight on e3, are very powerful places, and perhaps here something like rook to e8, rook b to e8, attacking the bishop on e6 would be interesting. It looks good for black, I find. So, well, this is not what happened in the game, but let's return to follow the actual moves. Rook takes e3, bishop takes e3, no, rook takes f6. So white sacrificing some material in order to keep attacking and get rid of this strong knight that was standing on e3. Here bishop to d4 was played, and the rook went back to f3. Black took on f3, and after g takes f3, the defense of the white king is being damaged now. There's more open space, and black starts counterattacking now with a move that activates the queen to f5, threatening to take on f3 with checkmate. So the solution for this that white tried was knight to g5, defending the f3 pawn with the knight and with the bishop, and threatening of course to take on h7 with the queen. Now black enters into white's position using the first rank, queen to b1 check. The king must go to g2, and now queen to g1 check. There's only one possible move, is the king to h3, and here white suddenly has a very difficult position. I would even say a lost position here. Black played queen to f1 check, and after king to g4, because if king to g3, then bishop to f2 wins the queen, so king must go to g4. Now h5 is played, and now there is even more trouble. After king to f4, queen to c1, the king again has two places. If he goes to e4, then queen to e3 is checkmate, so he went to g3, and here one more check on e1, king to h3, check on f1, king to g3, and now with queen to f2, black wins the queen of white, and the game is totally over. By the way, in this position white resigned, so he saw these two moves coming and didn't want to wait for that. So this is the game that was played on board 3 between the Indonesian Grandmaster Taufik Ahlai and the Chilean Grandmaster Mauricio Flores Rios. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time on YouTube. Thanks for watching.